Hi, I'm Connor Mead, and I'm here today at the 2017 Canadian Science Policy Conference, and joining me right now is Paul Dufour. So Paul, why don't you tell us a little bit about your work and your panel that you were participating in today on science integrity?
Sure, thanks Connor. I'm with the Institute for Science, Society and Policy at the University of Ottawa, part-time. I also teach a course at the university on science and policy interface. So I'm kind of a science policy junkie. I get involved in these conferences every year, so I really enjoy the mix, networking, blending of the young students here that are here, as well as, you know, the usual suspects. So I was invited to speak on this panel that was to discuss what are the new changes under this current government in terms of how they're going to address scientific integrity within the government and government science. And it was organized in part by the Professional Institute of Public Service, along with Evidence for Democracy, which has been one of these very interesting organizations created as a result of the previous regime to address some of the command control issues that the previous administration under Harper had in trying to muzzle the scientists in the government and trying to do some cutbacks around science, etc. So the Evidence for Democracy group was created as a kind of a movement, activist movement, to try to mobilize the science community, which normally is not very activist as a group, right? Tend to stick to their own knitting, so to speak. And get them more engaged politically in terms of what are we going to do about all this muzzling stuff that's going on? What can we do to impress upon the political parties that scientists have a say in this and it's important to us? So this particular panel was around this notion that perhaps the government could create within the collective bargaining agreements of each of the public service agencies and departments, a series of principles that departments would have to adhere to ensure that the government science research outputs that are coming out of those agencies can be discussed openly and in the public domain, in short, not muzzled. So the Professional Institute for Public Service has created a series of, with the government, a series of, I think it's 5 principles around how government scientists can now openly discuss their scientific research, make it available to the public, and it's part of their collective bargaining contracts that they've signed on to. So they've got a number of departments already have agreed to it. The government as a whole has accepted it, but a number of departments have now implemented them. And so we heard a little bit about that discussion yesterday. So my interest in this was because I was very much involved with this debate that was going on in Canada under the Harper administration when they were muzzling scientists. Media couldn't get access to the scientists. They had to go through enormous layers of approvals, and by that time, of course, media wasn't interested anymore because, you know, they needed to know right away what's the story, what's happening. So that all changed, of course, when the Trudeau administration came in. So they did 2 things right from the get-go, the first 2 days, right? Long-form census, which had been abolished by the previous governments, was reinstituted. And the second statement from the government was, we shall no longer muzzle our scientists. So as a result, this kicked in, and there has been discussions over the last year and a half to get this collective bargaining principles introduced and accepted by the various government departments and agencies. So it was an interesting discussion.
Yeah. Excellent.
Yeah.
So how do we navigate the challenge of developing policies and putting into writing policies that prevent the muzzling of scientists, while still accommodating for the fact that perhaps there are issues of confidentiality or other sensitivity? Yeah. How do we write rules that allow us to, you know, have appropriate controls on information that should be controlled while still giving optimal latitude to scientists and other professionals?
Yeah, no, that's a good question, and I think these principles are open enough in the sense that they allow for that. Of course, scientists that work within the public sphere, you know, won't be talking about issues that they are working on in terms of the confidentiality or classified information. I mean, that's a given, right? Particularly in Defense Department, for example, or elsewhere, where some of the research is quite confidential and cannot be divulged or should not be divulged. But on the other hand, there are issues that the government has said they would like to have more and more evidence available to the government to make decisions or help them make decisions. And that's part of the principles, is to use this evidence for helping public policy decision making, which I think, generally scientists are perfectly comfortable with. But the issue here is not they're going to be speaking about their research. They won't be offering their views on the public policy implications of their research as part of these series of principles that I just mentioned. So there's a little bit of tension there, but I think they're going to iron that out. It's going to take a while to sort that out because, of course, it's almost 10 years of being basically told, thou shalt not speak to media. Period, full stop, right? So that's going to take a while for it to embed itself within the government's apparatus, and particularly within the government's senior administration, which is, of course, still reeling and still trying to address what happened in the previous administration, right? So they've got, some time to sort this out.
So it really is amazing how the science policy and evidence-based policy community and advocacy community really blossomed over the past 10 years.
Yep.
Now we're in this totally new context, new government, new challenges. So how does the role of advocates of evidence-based policy change when the initial conditions that created a lot of that movement in those organizations is no longer the case?
Well, no, but I think, look, with any new government, you always have to be vigilant, and funny things can happen, right, along the way. So this is a community that now has woken up, from its whine and wimp lobby approach, which was, whine that don't have enough money, the wimp approach because they, of course, didn't understand that they had to be politically astute and understand strategically, what it is they're asking for and understand how government works. They got it as a result of the Harper administration. And Evidence for Democracy is one example. There are other groups that have been created as a result to mobilize, the science community, which normally, sits at home and, does its own thing, doesn't want to get engaged. But now they have to be engaged. But you have to watch constantly. And so Evidence for Democracy and others are monitoring, the rhetoric around we will value and respect science. We will use evidence in our decision making. Let's see how that works, right? A year and a half, well, almost 2 years now into their mandate. Is that working? Are we seeing indications that they're slipping a little bit away from that? Are they making decisions that ignore us? Those are the things we got to keep going, always, keep going at it. It's happening in the States, as you know, right now, right? So, you have a new administration now that it kind of flipped around, right? So from, they inherited a kind of a Harper. Well, although I won't go as far as saying that Trump is like Harper. He's probably worse. But it's interesting to see that the integrity question in the United States is now coming back because there is a clampdown coming in some of their agencies, because they don't fit the ideology, put that in quotes, of the current administration. Therefore, they're going to make it difficult for them. So here we have a sunnier ways, according to Mr. Trudeau. Let's see how that works.
So what would be some of the indicators that you'll be looking for over the next year or two to see if the present government really does deliver on some of the hope and the promises that they've conveyed to the science policy community versus whether they've maybe let it slip as less of a priority area?
Well, I mean, look, we heard from the minister last night about what she's trying to accomplish through her mandate letter. She's appointed a science advisor, a chief science advisor. She's moving ahead on responding to some of these recommendations from the Naylor report on fundamental science. She's looking at early career researchers and what needs to be done to try to support them a bit more. So, they're moving ahead. They still haven't found the money that the Naylor report was asked for, and we'll see where that goes in the next budget. But there are indications that they're taking a bit more seriously their responsibility around around the liberal platform that was unique in the sense that they actually introduced within their election platform something about science, because it's rare to hear science brought into a platform on issues that are much broader for a Liberal Party or any party for that matter, around how to deal with middle income and taxes and issues around education and health and so on and so forth. So it was really interesting to see that. So we'll see if the rhetoric is matched with reality and action down the road. We'll cut them some slack over the little while, because they're figuring out what they should be doing on a number of fronts. They got a lot of balls up in the air. So let's see where that goes, and we'll have to be very watchful around whether they can match the rhetoric.
Excellent.
Yep.
So if you were writing a policy platform for any party for the next federal election, what would be some science policy related asks that you would advocate to include?
Well, I would start with, I think, they've said that they're going to create a new advisory committee to help out the science advisor. Let's see, I would incorporate, a structure that would help a chief science advisor do her job better. Right now, she's by herself, $2 million budget, small office. She's buried in a larger industry department. Hopefully she'll get more support. That's number one. Number two is, I think this is a government that said a lot about Canada's back. We're back, whatever that means. We're going to brand Canada globally. And so you've got a guy who's the Prime Minister, who's now a kind of a celebrity in many ways, globally, wherever he goes. People are doing selfies with him. It's all exciting stuff, right? But we're going to be hosting the G7 summit in Canada next year. That means we should be a little more serious about what are the engagements that Canada is going to take on with respect to climate change, global health, our assistance in terms of science organizations globally, dealing with these really wicked problems that we have around the world around climate change and mental health issues, which are, I'm sure you've heard from the previous speaker on that. And what we're doing with our international responsibilities, where science, technology has an incredibly strong role to play.
Excellent.
That's what I would put in.
So we're just coming to the end of the 2017 Canadian Science Policy Conference.
Yep.
What has been your experience of the past 3 days? How does it compare to previous years? What have been some of your main takeaways from the event?
Yeah, no, I've been to all of them except for one, I think, and it's gotten bigger for starters. It's getting more of a buzz, simply because you've got all of these volunteers and young students doing fabulous work, and that's growing. And I think that's a good thing. I mean, old guys like me, I'm not going to be around for all this stuff, right? So they're going to pick up the ball, and it's nice to see them more and more engaged. More gender equity issues being addressed. You've got a lot more women participation. The issue here, it tends to be an English-dominated forum. I think we need to get more of our French language colleagues involved. That's an issue, I think, that's going to be addressed. And for this year, because we had, that new superstar, Julie Payette, give the keynote address, and we had the minister, we had the chief science advisor, and we had this fabulous presentation by Neil Turok on the origins of the universe. How do you follow that up next year? Next year, you get the Prime Minister to show up. Get him to show up and do his thing and really give a keynote address about why this is so important to this government. He has yet to give a keynote address on that subject, even though he's very supportive of it, but he hasn't said and provided that signal, right? And yeah, our global ambassador by the name of Julie Payette can do that, but at the end of the day, a signal from the Prime Minister is going to matter. So I think next year, 10th anniversary, think about getting the PM engaged in some significant way. But it's a fabulous event. Yeah. You guys do great work.
Thank you. Well,
so
Prime Minister Trudeau, if you're watching, you have our number.
1-800.
So my last question before we wrap up. For those who are watching at home, including our Prime Minister, hopefully, where can we go online to learn more about your work?
Well, you can send me my emails. Yeah.
All right.
Yeah. Policy Works. PAUL. My first name. Yeah. ICY Works.
Excellent.
.com. Yeah. That's me.
All right. Well, Paul, thank you so much for joining us. It's been an absolute pleasure having this conversation, and hope you enjoy the rest of the day.
And you too. Bon weekend, monsieur. Au plaisir.